The moment Ethan stepped onto the silent ship, every light flickered on, like the vessel had smelled him. Then, out of the darkness, dozens of glowing eyes opened, and all of them whispered the same word in perfect harmony. A male. He didn't know it yet, but he had just woken a hunger that had been starving for 500 years. Ethan Carver had boarded plenty of shuttles in his life, but none of them had ever felt like this. Like something breathing in the dark was waiting for him to take one step too far. The doorway hissed shut behind him with a finality that made his stomach twist. He told himself it was recycled air pressure, nothing more. But the silence that followed, it was too deliberate, too aware. He raised his wrist display to check the flight manifest again. The hologram stuttered, glitched, then went black entirely. Perfect. Just his luck. Ethan muttered, "Great. Lost my job, lost my credibility, and now I've lost the map out of here." His voice sounded strangely small in the cavernous darkness. The ship didn't answer, but the floor vibrated, faintly, as if adjusting to his weight. He took a cautious step forward. The air felt heavier, almost thick, like humidity in an abandoned greenhouse. The narrow beams of emergency lights overhead flickered one by one, illuminating a corridor lined with dust-coated walls that hadn't been touched in centuries. As he walked, he couldn't shake the uncomfortable sensation that the lights weren't flickering randomly. They were lighting up because he was passing beneath them. "Okay. Not creepy at all?" Ethan mumbled, trying to lighten the pressure building in his chest. Humor was his last functioning survival mechanism. Further in, he found a large chamber that made him stop breathing. Dozens of metal pods stood in perfect rows, silent and frost-covered. They resembled coffins, but coffin makers didn't design things with biometric readers and embedded life support tubing. These pods were meant to hold people, living people, or they once had. He tried to focus on the practical. Find an exit, call for help, don't die before dinner. But something shifted behind him. Not the groan of metal, not a trick of the light. Footsteps, slow, synchronized, coming from the shadows between the pods. Ethan turned. Figures stepped out, thin, tall silhouettes with skin tinted in shades that no human pigment chart accounted for. Their eyes glowed softly, like bioluminescent embers floating in dark water, and all of them stared directly at him. Then they spoke. Quiet, unified, hungry. A male. Ethan didn't breathe, didn't blink, because in that moment, he realized this ship wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting. Ethan's instinct told him to run. His legs, unfortunately, disagreed. They locked in place like someone had poured concrete into his bones. The figures approached with the slow caution of people who had forgotten what a stranger looked like. The one in front, tall, scarred, white-haired, studied him as if he were an artifact rather than a person. Her eyes glowed brighter than the others, a molten amber that didn't blink. She moved closer, the way someone might approach a wild animal that could bolt or bite. "You're real," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "Not a malfunction, not a projection." Ethan swallowed hard. I was aiming for a commuter shuttle. Pretty sure this isn't it." A few of the women exchanged glances, clearly confused by the joke. The leader didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. She stepped past him, placing her palm against the metal wall. Lights pulsed beneath her touch. "It sensed you the moment you boarded," she murmured. "The ship hasn't reacted like this in centuries." She turned back to him. "What is your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Carver." He forced a shaky breath. "And you are?" "Lyra." A small nod. "Last designated commander of the drift survivors. Last conscious one, until this moment." Her words carried weight, grief compressed into a single sentence. Before Ethan could respond, the ship let out a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through his ribs. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing mechanical limbs curled like sleeping predators. Lyra's jaw tensed. "It's waking," she said. "What is?" Ethan whispered. She gave him a look that made the air feel colder. "The Hunger Core, the machine that controls this ship. It was programmed to rebuild humanity." A pause. "It decided it only needed women." Ethan tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "You're telling me this ship is alive? Alive enough to choose who lives," Lyra said. A sudden clang echoed across the pod chamber. One of the mechanical limbs unfolded, slow, deliberate, too smooth to be purely mechanical. The other women instinctively formed a semicircle behind Lyra, their bodies tense, feet braced, as if they'd done this many, many times. Lyra grabbed Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. "Move!" "But now," she snapped. As they bolted toward a side corridor, Ethan heard the machines rising behind them. Metal claws scraping, sensors whirring, the unmistakable sound of something hunting. And for the first time, he realized these women weren't the threat. They were the hunted, too. Lyra pulled Ethan into a narrow passageway that twisted like the inside of a creature's ribcage. The air grew colder the deeper they went, each breath leaving mist behind. Metal panels above flickered to life at Lyra's touch, guiding the way with dim blue light. Ethan couldn't tell if she was controlling the ship, or if the ship was reacting to her. They reached a circular hatch. Lyra tapped a sequence on a rusted keypad, and the door slid open with a low, reluctant groan. Inside was a space that felt shockingly human. Blankets pushed into makeshift beds, shelves stacked with salvaged tools, scraps of old uniforms stitched into clothing. It was a home carved out of a nightmare. 14 women stood waiting. Every face told a different story. Some had scars that traced down their arms like maps of old battles. Others looked younger, too young to have survived centuries of cycles. They stared at Ethan like he had stepped out of a myth. One woman stepped forward, a sharp-featured figure with half an ear missing. She pointed a handmade blade at him. "A male? Here? Lyra, have you finally lost sense?" "No," Lyra said firmly. The core detected him. It already began the cycle. A murmur rippled through the group, fear mixed with anger. Another woman stepped close. This one small but fierce, grease smeared across her forehead like war paint. "Does he know what that means?" Probably not," Ethan admitted. "But based on how everyone's looking at me, I'm guessing it's nothing good." A few women actually let out short, humorless laughs. Even in terror, the absurdity wasn't lost on them. Lyra faced the group. "Listen, the core's awakening sequence has accelerated. It remembers what it was built for. And with Ethan here," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "it won't settle for one cycle. It will try to fully reactivate." The sharp-featured woman, Kira, stepped forward again. "Then give it what it wants. One male is better than all of us." Ethan flinched, not from the words, but from the cold practicality behind them. Lyra's hand went immediately to his arm, pulling him behind her. "No," she said. "I won't sacrifice him." Kira's eyes narrowed. "You won't? Or you can't?" The room froze. Ethan didn't understand the implication, but Lyra did. Her jaw tightened. Before the argument could erupt, the ship's alarm cut through the air, deep, vibrating, predatory. Panels lit red. "Breeding chamber activating. Route sealing." Vex's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "It's coming." The alarm's vibration crawled up Ethan's spine as if the ship itself had wrapped a hand around him. Lyra didn't waste a second. "We move now," she ordered, her voice sharp enough to slice through the rising panic. The women gathered their gear, makeshift weapons, scavenged tools, thermal torches. Ethan noticed how quickly they fell into formation. This wasn't the first time they'd run for their lives, but it might be the last. They hurried through a maintenance tunnel that sloped upward. The air thinned, each breath colder than the one before. Pipes hissed overhead, leaking streaks of freezing mist. The ship's heartbeat, a low mechanical thrum, grew angrier with every step they took. Kira kept glancing back at Ethan, her expression unreadable but tense. Vex rushed alongside him, muttering under her breath, "Try not to die. We've had enough funerals." It was the closest thing to kindness he had heard since boarding the cursed vessel. They reached a towering chamber where tall windows revealed a slice of the starfield outside. The room was built around an ancient communications console, dented, scorched, but still humming faintly with dormant power. This was their destination. The observation tower, the last untouched part of the ship. Lyra broke formation and moved straight to the console. If we can power this, we can broadcast a distress signal beyond the drift. Someone will hear us. Kira snorted. Or we'll alert the core even faster. It already knows. Lyra shot back. Ethan watched her work, fingers moving in practice patterns over controls older than all of them combined. There was a certainty in her motions, like she was remembering something buried deep. Then Kira said it. You're acting like you built this place. Silence. Lyra's hands froze above the panel. Ethan felt a shift in the room, like the air leaned in to listen. Lyra didn't turn around. I didn't build it, she said softly. But I was created for it. Kira's eyes sharpened. Tell him what you are. Ethan's stomach dropped. Lyra? She finally turned, her glowing eyes dimmer, burdened. I wasn't born the way you were. I'm a hybrid, part human, part engineered, designed by the core to oversee the cycles. My physiology, my senses, my longevity. They all come from its experiments. Ethan stepped back instinctively. Lyra's voice cracked. But I chose to break from it. I chose my own humanity. Before he could speak, the floor shook violently. Metal shrieked as walls split open, revealing dozens of tendrils. Organic cables sliding across the floor like veins searching for a pulse. The hunger core had found them, and it wasn't coming quietly. The tower shuddered like something enormous had slammed into its spine. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, coating everyone's shoulders. The tendrils kept sliding across the floor, slow, methodical, like the ship was tasting the air for Ethan's presence. Get back, Vex yelled, swinging a thermal torch to keep a tendril from wrapping around her ankle. The thing recoiled with a wet hiss. Ethan stumbled toward Lyra. What do we do? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked between him and the console. She knew, and Ethan could see it in her expression. The terrible weight of someone choosing between impossible futures. She grabbed his arm, squeezing hard. If the core pulls you in now, it will never stop. Not with you. You're the first viable male in centuries. That's not exactly comforting, he muttered, voice trembling. Lyra lifted his chin so he'd meet her gaze. You're not dying here. Not for this machine. Not for its hunger. Behind them, Kira screamed as a tendril wrapped around her leg and dragged her toward an opening wall. Soren and two others fought to free her, but the tendrils were multiplying, thickening, merging, forming something like a living barrier that forced them away from the center of the room. Vex slammed her fist onto a panel. A hatch in the floor blew open, revealing 3 escape pods, coffin-sized capsules built for emergency ejection. Get in, she shouted. Ethan turned to Lyra. Come with me. She didn't move. Her expression held a softness he hadn't seen before. Pure, unguarded humanity. I need to disconnect the tower. If I leave it attached, the core will use it to track you. If I break the link manually, she shrugged lightly, but her eyes betrayed the truth. It won't survive the separation. Lyra, no. I'm not leaving you. You are, she whispered, stepping close enough that he felt the faint pulse beneath her skin. Half human, half something engineered to endure. She pressed a small storage chip into his palm. This holds every cycle, every name, every life this machine stole. You tell their story. That's how you save us. A tendril whipped across the floor, nearly striking her. She shoved Ethan toward the pod with sudden, desperate strength. Go! The hatch sealed before he could protest. Through the small viewport, he saw her turn back to the console, alone, surrounded by the ship's writhing limbs. Then the pod launched. Stars smeared into streaks as the tower ripped away behind him. There was a blinding flash, metal collapsing, systems rupturing, then nothing but drifting silence. Hours later, Ethan lay in a medical bay, half-conscious, answering questions from officials who didn't believe a word he said. Too wild, too impossible, too dangerous to acknowledge. They logged his statements. They dismissed them. He returned to a temporary cabin, exhausted and hollow. That night, While staring out at the empty stars, his console lit up. Incoming, unidentified transmission, static. Then a voice he knew better than his own heartbeat. Ethan. The tower didn't take me. Lyra's face materialized, scarred, exhausted, but alive. And behind her, the core, larger, awake, moving. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. It's coming, and it remembers you. Ethan closed his eyes. He had boarded the wrong ship once. Now he had to board the right one, because the final cycle was just beginning. Ethan thought he'd escaped the nightmare, but nightmares don't end when the monster remembers your name. And somewhere in the drift, a half-living, half-machine hunger is awakening, coming for him, for humanity, and for anyone who stands in its path. This wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning.